Hence I have no mercy or compassion in me for a society that will crush people and then penalize them for not being able to stand up under the weight. Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X. The Daily Grind, Chapter 175. All things considered, Sarah was having a pretty good day. Currently, she was in the house underneath Clutter Ascent, eating some kind of melted goat cheese on toast. It was a bit of a bizarre flavor. She was pretty sure she didn't ever want it again, and it was also shockingly compelling to the point that she was also pretty sure she would be having it a few more times before her tongue caught up to the fact that she was doing it. The house was occupied now. Karen had done some kind of money magic and ended up sniping it off the market. Harvey's old fraternity brother, who used to live here, hadn't wanted a thing to do with it, even after they'd been upfront about the nature of his supposedly haunted attic. He'd already moved. He was perfectly fine, so was his family. He'd just take the money and go, thank you very much. So the Order owned a house, which was nice. A house with a dungeon in it, which was nicer. There were just a couple of problems, like how the dungeon was mostly defenseless, and also their friend, and also it was a waste of property taxes to not actually use the house. Fortunately, Sarah had solved most of these problems all at once by making the house a communal living space for several victims of the office's old kidnapping attempt. Nick, Brian, Suri, and Jose were all members of the support group that Sarah ran. 2 of them were competent programmers. All of them were scarily good at a lot of esoteric skulljack tricks. Suri, especially, who had learned how to leave an imprint of herself when disconnecting from another person's mind, a little ghost that could continue to influence or communicate for a moment or two until it faded away. Sarah was pretty sure it was one of them that had come up with the trick of having a single person listen to her daily update podcast and then sharing the direct memory file amongst themselves. None of them were actually members of the Order of Endless Rooms, though. They were all welcome to if they wanted, obviously, but they just weren't part of it. Either because they weren't ready, or they weren't interested, but whatever the reason, they hadn't wanted to pick up the banner. But they were still orphans of a kind, cut off from their old lives by overexposure to the grinding Infovorous memeplex of Officium Mundi, cut off from their place in the normal world by the modifications to their bodies. And while they were reclaiming a pattern of normal life, Sarah was well aware that it could be hard to adjust, hard to get back to feeling like you were stable, ever again. So the Order helped, because that was just kind of what they did. The house was just sitting there anyway, and the new residents were more than willing to pay a little rent and deal with the maintenance. Brian had picked up a job as a truck driver, Suri worked as a barista, Jose was... Well, Sarah was pretty sure about this, but he was doing data entry and flagrantly cheating using his skulljack. The fact that their rent was about $100 a month probably helped with the general friendly mood around the house. The human residents were supplemented with a pair of Camercondas, who had arguably either a better or worse history of trauma. Echo's crashing waves and feeling of home both lived here as well, and so far there hadn't been any problems with the mixed species living situation. Feeling of Home actually was a member of the Order, recently having become recognized as a knight and having a place on a response team, but Echo's crashing waves just... well, he wanted to be somewhere else. He'd survived years of living on the edge of doom within the office, and while the colony of liberated Camercondas had something that looked like a culture, it wasn't exactly a strongly rooted set of traditions. They weren't a monolith, basically. Some of them wanted to join the people who'd saved them, some of them wanted to take time to discover themselves, and some, like Echoes, just wanted to live away from all of the chaos. Maybe meet a few new people, and spend their days watching nature documentaries. Sarah loved all of them, especially Jose, who was currently serving her goat cheese. She tried to stop in every time she came to visit Clutter Ascent, just to check up on all of them too, and not just because they fed her. They were all wonderful people, and Sarah loved each of them dearly. She had once heard one of the newer members of a response team, upon hearing about James's romantic life, complain that humans weren't meant to love more than one person. She found that position to be dumb, And cowardly. Love wasn't about you. It was about finding things to love in others. Once you had that secret, you had everything you needed. Sarah was pretty sure Clutterascent agreed with her, too, insofar as a dungeon thought in any similar way to a human. But it was a confident guess on her part, and as she clambered up the steps to the attic, she felt an aura surround her that reminded her of chocolate chip cookies on a summer afternoon, the feeling of comfort and safety that she missed painfully out in the real world. Kelly was out today. Their newest full-time mental health specialist used a part of Clutter as a private area for therapy and counseling. She had a sign up by the stairs, a little plaque hanging from a string of pink hearts informing everyone the doctor was out. Sarah smiled at it. Kelly was, in addition to acting as a trauma specialist for a lot of the high schoolers that had survived the attack from the Akashic Sewer, doing long-term research on the influence of Clutter's peaceful atmosphere on a human mind. She'd even supplied her own intern, which was amusing, though Sarah did wonder where the intern had come from. He'd been checked out first, obviously. Somebody knew where the intern had come from, just not her. They weren't going to let people bring random interns in without some safety measure. But for the vast majority of people, there wasn't really a reason to say no. Sarah followed a path that she almost knew through the dungeon, but that changed on a whim sometimes. Through distorted, tall chests of drawers with blinking balls of tangled Christmas lights. At one point, she passed by a dresser with a simple jewelry box sitting on it in plain view, with a curious little vibe to it. These kinds of things popped up sometimes, and Sarah smiled as she reached out to open it. 6 minutes later, she had pieced together the scene of standing on a sandy beach staring up at the stars minutes after the sun had set. The jewelry box held a relation stick, a word that she still internally giggled at, and Sarah pocketed the little wooden dowel with a vague intention to pass it off to somebody else in the future. Her hand was already marked with a nebula of circles, over a dozen people she had formed connections with. Already she could share intuition with her production assistant as long as the two of them were in the same city, and stamina with the Camerconda High Priestess if they could hear each other. The rest? Well, not all of them were filled, but she'd unlock them all with time. Time and charm. That was her secret weapon. Continuing her pathfinding, Sarah paused briefly to share what was left of her toast and cheese that she had been holding in her offhand with Rufus and Frederick when the two of them ambushed her. The two of them both different species from wildly different dungeons with wildly different body compositions, and yet both with names that sounded like they fell out of a city council meeting. Though Frederick did sometimes play around with going by Umbra. Not Armillary, though. He didn't like that part of the name that Sarah had bestowed upon him. Either way, Frederick's idea of an ambush was making startling noises and then demanding snacks. Rufus's idea... Well, Sarah met Rufus's eye and nodded at the supervising stapler. If Rufus actually wanted to set an ambush, she was pretty sure he could kill a human in the opening 5 seconds. But instead, here he was, being a kind of dungeon big brother to a growing stuffed animal. Rufus nodded back, and Sarah kept moving, the two of them tailing after her for a while until Frederick got distracted by a noise in the distance and lit off after it. Multitude of limbs unfolding to carry him up over the furniture and across the ceiling, Rufus taking dramatic hops across dressers and chests of drawers to follow. Sarah was laughing as she pushed her way through the front entrance of the blanket fort they had built last month. It was different than the first one. They'd actually built a new one every few weeks, just for fun, and also so nothing stagnated in the growing dungeon. This was a bit of a problem, actually. None of them had a single clue how dungeons grew or lived or anything at all. They certainly didn't know how or why they changed what magic they produced, though they knew that Clutter certainly could, and had once already. They were taking every note they could about Clutter's behavior and patterns, but in the end it was a lot of guessing and a lot of maybes. At every step they were making broad assumptions and trying to blindly guess how to proceed without hurting Clutter in any way. They had 2 people here now who were more or less trained in child development. The original preschool teacher James had hired, and a part-time professional nanny who was helping them identify behavioral cues. Miraculously, it seemed like it was starting to work. Not all the way, but maybe a foothold, something to work from. Paying attention to how the dungeon reacted, and acting in good faith when it did, was leading to the continued development of a space that was both magical and yet non-hostile. Sarah wasn't going to say it wasn't dangerous, but it certainly was different from every other dungeon they'd found. The life it was creating was more like particularly smart and curious raccoons rather than dedicated combat forms. And up in the attic's own attic, Sarah still had an ongoing project trying to find a way to stabilize the living cloud that Clutter Ascent had made. Right now, though, she was here for a different reason. It wasn't anything serious. She really was just here to check up on things. The placement of the puzzle boxes did make it seem like Clutter enjoyed sharing the challenges with them, so Sarah did a few more that popped up here, experiencing a golden sunset and a rainy night for another pair of relation sticks. She read out loud a chapter of the book she was going through with the dungeon from a pile of pillows. She took notes on the boundaries of the dungeon's expansion, updating their map to where the borders of space extended far beyond the house's original floor plan. And then she tried to make sense of the book. It had appeared one day out of nowhere, which wasn't exactly uncommon for this place, or dungeons in general. Nestled slightly askew between a worn, dog-eared copy of the Practice Effect and a brand new copy of Good Omens, both of which had been sourced from James's bookshelf, the book had almost instantly caught Sarah's attention as a creation from Clutter Ascent. She knew that James and Alana could feel stuff from the office, and Elle apparently had a similar vibe check going on for the Horizon, so it made sense that the place that she spent most of her time would give her a similar synchronicity. What had surprised her more than that was the book itself. Sarah had no idea what it did. It was almost comically magical. The cover was a shifting galaxy of stars, arranging itself into patterns that suggested at the presence of great beasts and heroic knights. The words inside were complex arrangements that said nothing, but felt like the weight of a story. And yet aside from that, it seemed to be a book. A perfectly normal book that was an inch thick and weighed 20 pounds, bound in void black leather that came from no living creature on Earth, with stars on the cover. Sarah had been trying to read the book for weeks, and it was driving her slightly mad. There was a moment briefly where she almost said something that she'd once been told by her mom. "I don't understand, but I'm glad you made something that you like." Sarah had reined that impulse in, remembering how much it had hurt to hear it herself, and flipped a page, trying to sort out what story she was being told by the dungeon. One way or another, she would understand. She'd crack this one, and then, maybe, she could talk to her dungeon friend about the book that they had made. Elle was having a pretty medium day, which was impressive because 2 days ago she had gotten +1 skill rank, weapon, knife, switchblade, which was very useful actually, and right now she was putting the skill to practical application, slitting a paper pusher open from hip to throat. The spray of ground paper dust and uncomfortably sharp confetti missing her face by inches as she pivoted and kicked the stumbling Officium Mundi creature forward with a boot that somehow didn't unbalance her. Ahead of her, Daniel caught the damaged, faceless nightmare person in the head with an aluminum baseball bat, bursting its skull open in a cloud of gray particulate that slowly dusted down to the floor. Dropping her leg back to that floor with a sweep and barely keeping her footing steady through the spike of pain in her side, the two of them did a visual sweep of the area, seeing nothing left to threaten their delve team. Flicking her knife closed and dropping it casually into her pocket, Elle accepted the soft high five from Daniel as she walked past him to scoop up the grapefruit-sized, greenish-yellow orb into her backpack, while Daniel checked the overturned mail cart, mundane mail cart, not a live mall cart, that the thing had been pushing for magical cargo. No matter how many of these things they saw and took apart, the stuffed shirts were still fucking terrifying to Elle. Blank faces, usually, that sometimes had mouths and eyes absolutely inhuman, and you knew it from the moment you laid eyes on one. They'd run into so many types at this point, Elle was starting to keep score. There were the normal ones that just screamed corporate slogans at you and tried to break your bones. There were the ones that liked to pretend they were bipedal until they noticed you, and then they dropped to all fours and howl like wolves. There were the ones that did kind of have faces, which were actually a symbiotic mask thing made out of sticky notes, and it was gross on its own when they would peel those off and throw them at you. And then there were the ones that just delivered the mail, who would often try to curse you with some kind of attack infomorph. Elle hated all of them, but not in an active way, more like a, another one of these things kind of way. Also in a, what a twisted mirror of humanity, how could anything ever see this as the totality of a person, oh right, office jobs do this to people kind of way. Elle had a lot of thoughts about the paper pushers. Purple here, Daniel said, tossing it into the backpack as she held it open for him, distracting Elle from her glaring at the shredded paper corpse. With a single fluid motion, she zipped up the pack and whipped it back into a comfortable spot over the armor she was wearing. They'd given her armor, but Elle liked her freedom of movement too much to go for the whole ensemble. She wore the arm and leg guards just fine, but she wasn't cramming herself into that stupid bug-looking chest plate. "All right, good to go," she replied quietly, the two of them keeping their voices down. They were out in the deep dungeon. Not as far as the dungeon went, but as far as the order went, for now anyway, where architecture got weird and surprises were painful. Keeping quiet here was a defense mechanism, and they'd stay quiet right up until they swept the cubicle tower they were headed toward, and then teleported back to Fort Door Take 2. Well, they would. "You two are way too good at this shit," Theo said, just a little bit loudly, their guest interrupting them. Elle and Daniel both froze up momentarily, listening sharply for any sudden movements around them over the rustling of the dot matrix paper vines that lined the cubicle walls. Nothing. Safe, for now. "Keep it down, moron," Elle said. First thing she'd learned in a dungeon, and not this one, was that whispering was loud. You didn't whisper, you spoke. You just spoke quietly. "You can be less mean," Daniel chastised her, also quietly. "But, yeah, please be quiet, Theo." He looked sheepish, rubbing the back of his neck where a fairly recently grown skulljack sat. "We don't know what's out there." Theo rolled her eyes, but she did oblige them. "Whatever it is, maybe you can kill that too," she grumbled. "You know, I remember you being a wuss," she told Daniel. "That was a long time ago." "Oh, it was not," she snorted. "I'm just feeling useless here." Daniel looked around at the tall, beige walls around them. A routine sweep for staplers, or mice sneaking up on them, but also a good excuse to not say anything or make eye contact. Elle took the pause as an opportunity. "Why'd you even come along if you don't want to fight or ruffle through drawers?" "Hey, I'll fight," Theo objected. "But you got it handled, and I'm just here as backup or something. Maybe some kind of pack mule. Wait, no. Fuck, I don't know." She winced as her voice rose a little too loud, dragging it back under control quickly. Thea was abrasive, but she wasn't an idiot. "I hate this place, man, but I need the cash, and I'll try to be less of a bitch about it." Elle sighed herself, taking her turn at rolling her eyes, but saying out loud, "Yeah, all right, I'll keep the bitchiness down too," before following that up by asking, "Hey, if you hate this place, why keep coming back in? You know James would just give you the cash." "It's true," Daniel confirmed. "He's a giant softy, once you get to know him." "How do you not hate this place?" Theo asked Daniel. "It ruined our lives." "It didn't do that to me," Daniel said softly. He reached out his left hand to the side, an orange shimmer pulling away from the limb, forming a ghostly echo of a hand, albeit one that had its own echo of feathers and talons laid over it. He turned his palm face up, and the glowing shadow turned too, the two of them intertwining their fingers. It gave me something special, he said. They walked as they talked, the low conversation failing to be loud enough to distract from spotting ambushes. And there were ambushes. This far out, there were always ambushes. 3, 4, maybe 5 miles from their home base tower. Elle had walked 5 miles inside a building, and her brain still didn't know how to do anything with that information. So how's the whole non-corporal romance work? Elle asked Daniel, instead of thinking about the distance they'd traveled. She ever ghost you? Corporeal, he corrected her, smiling like he couldn't hold the feeling inside, seeming to just slide over her joke. I don't really know. Don't have anything to compare it to. How about you? Getting along with Speaky? Daniel rattled off the name of the infomorph that had been growing in Elle's mind ever since James had put it there to kill off whatever the route had been using to keep her from talking about it. They paused as they came to a covered intersection. The shadows stretched long here, lights overhead making sharp lines where the walls curved over the narrow hallways. The intersection had a vending machine in it, wedged between where 2 new corridors split off at weird angles. In the blue-purple light of its front face, Daniel could make out a potted plant that was entirely too suspicious. Cutting their conversation short for the moment, he gave Theo a nod to watch their rear while he and Elle circled the plant, lunged together, and snapped its trunk near the base before it could get a hit in on them. It dropped a few small orbs. They split them up. +1 skill rank, logistics, shipping, Eastern Canada for Daniel, and +1 skill rank, theater, improv for Elle. Theo saved hers, though whether that was because she planned to trade it to somebody else or she just had an aversion to the things was kind of up in the air. They moved on, until they passed out of the dark area and back into the fluorescent day. So the thing is, Elle picked up the conversation 20 minutes later when they found a patch of safe, non-trapped cubicles to search over and rest in. I don't know what I'm doing. Theo opened her mouth to comment from her seat in front of a computer as she tried to crack its password, but Daniel held out a hand. She means about the infomorph. He cut off the potential sniped insult. That thing we were talking about, you know. And, yeah, good luck. Oh, come on, Elle griped. You gotta know something. How'd Path get, better? Pathfinder's a different species, Daniel reminded her. Talk to James or something. Or go find your own cartomorph. Just ask JP for a venture into the horizon. Get Speaky a sibling. Yeah, get more extra people living in your head. Great idea, Theo snorted again. You people. This is why I didn't want to join up, you know? You have zero respect for what it means to be human. Oh, fuck off, Elle glared back at her pointlessly, abandoning her plan to dial down the bitchiness like she'd promised earlier. Thea was still focused on the screen and didn't really see Elle's glower, but she got the impression. You didn't seem to mind the limits of humanity when we made you immune to cancer or paid your rent for a decade. That's different, Theo offered. With that, Whatever she was going to say was cut off as a glowing red, fish-shaped blob of light shot out of the computer screen she was working on, darted through her chest, and shot away into the building. Elle snatched for it, but missed, and the creature was gone in a heartbeat, diving down a dark hall before taking a corner and vanishing, flicker of red light, disappearing as it rounded the corner. Uh-oh, Daniel said, eyebrows raised. What was that? Theo demanded. Check your wallet, I guess, Daniel said. Haven't seen one of those in a while. Ops says they steal personal info, so you might need, like, a new driver's license, new bank card or something. Oh, I don't use a bank card, Theo said, her voice like she was on autopilot. Elle and Daniel shared looks with each other. Bank card, they echoed. They let it go. The card was replaceable. Their lives, chasing a tiny, fast, ethereal dungeon life through dark cubicle corridors, were not. A half-dozen small moments made up the next 2 hours. Picking off staplers that got too close, spotting a glittering decision tree in the distance, crossing a burbling river of hot printer ink on a precarious bridge of cubicle walls. Elle feeding a mall cart some junk mail she'd brought along with a massive grin on her face. All of them flowed together as they kept moving. Theo even kind of stopped needling her after she realized she could just ignore the angry woman. Elle didn't get Theo. Elle was an angry person, she would admit that, and Elle realized that she was also an asshole sometimes, but she was legitimately working on it. Theo just seemed mad that the world was different than she'd expected, and she hadn't changed to adapt. Like she was angry for the sake of being angry. At one point, when Theo had rounded a corner ahead of them, taking her turn in the lead to scout quietly, Daniel had set a hand on Elle's shoulder and given her a questioning look. Elle had taken the second to stop, take a breath, and use the trick her therapist had taught her to push away her annoyance for a minute and look at things clearly. She shrugged at Daniel, and he nodded back. Both of them knew they weren't going to delve with Theo again, but the moment of introspection didn't bring Elle any closer to understanding why. Why was she like that? 3 hours later, they were standing at the top of a cubicle tower, a trail of defenders cut down behind them. Mostly 2.0s, which had fucked up her hairstyle, again, and one particularly aggressive Camerconda that Elle had felt super bad about knifing through the chest. Camercondas didn't read as monsters to her anymore. Not that they ever really had. But now it just felt like killing a kid. They teleported back, dropped off the duffel bag jam-packed with coffee grounds that was worth more than Elle's entire life earnings a dozen times over. Elle found a quiet spot to wipe her tears away in, while Daniel passed off the bag of orbs to their quartermaster for distribution. The cluster of 8 small greens got a grin from the old guy doing inventory. Elle was pretty sure he was one of the people who was also doing construction for them, so that checked out. "You doing okay?" Daniel asked her, concerned. "Yeah, legs hurt. You know how scars are sexy?" Elle asked. "No? Oh. Well, good, 'cause they hurt, and suck." She rubbed at the lines in her flesh where one of the asphalt things had carved her open a couple months back. "You got Theo's money stack?" "Yeah, let's pay her and get back to doing something useful." That was the closest that Elle had ever heard Daniel come to being sarcastic, and she snorted a laugh at it. They gave Theo her money, and she gave them a half-baked apology about being a jerk for the evening. And then, before leaving, she'd said something that hadn't left Elle's head since. "You two work way too well as a team." They did, Elle realized, which was weird because she wasn't a team player. She'd always delved alone, always done this kind of thing alone. And yeah, she'd had time to learn since really actually joining the Order, but she didn't have the same experience being on a team that everyone else did. Even Daniel's first experience with a delve had been as part of a group. As part of a group with James, even. And yet, Elle meshed perfectly with Daniel when the two of them ran supply delves like this. She knew exactly where to stand to be out of the way, knew where to cover to keep her partner safe. She knew it without actually thinking about it. It wasn't something she'd practiced. It wasn't something anyone had told her. She just kind of understood. She mentally poked at the infomorph that was living in her head. Was he, maybe, responsible for this? There was no response, of course. He was still young, couldn't manifest outside of a particularly deep dream, so probably not. So why, then, was she so good at this? Elle frowned as she rolled the thought around her mind like a loose tooth. One way or another, she decided, she'd figure this out. She'd crack this one. After that, she'd figure out where to go from there. If you asked him, Dave would say his day was going fine. Dave didn't really have a good framework for determining what constituted a bad day. Usually, he just assumed that any day he got through without some kind of emotional screw-up was pretty alright, and he went from there. That had gotten a lot easier, as the problems in his life had shifted away from managing the logistics of a chaotic work schedule and toward fighting monsters and saving the world. Which was probably weird. He was given to understand that for most people, stressful situations like that were somewhat traumatic, and it wasn't like he was going to lie and say he didn't experience stress or something stupid like that, but fundamentally, it was just that a direct engagement with someone trying to kill him was refreshingly simple. Right now, he was sitting in the front seat of a panel van next to JP, dealing with a rather non-simple problem, and he wasn't a huge fan of it. So, why not just ask them? He was asking his friend. Because, again, if there's some kind of magical mental parasite that's replacing people, you can't trust those people to answer honestly, JP explained, the same point for the third time. Dave nodded, mostly just because the gesture was an expected one, and then ruined that by continuing. Right, but what I'm saying is, what if you ask the parasite, which seems like a rude thing to call it, by the way? We're not being nice to the thing that kills people, JP shot back without thinking. I kill people, Dave said simply. JP had been through a lot of turmoil in his life lately, but he still, on a deep and fundamental level, knew that he wasn't going to let Dave pull that shit with him. Self-defense is different from eating people's brains and puppeting their bodies, you dumbass. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, not taking his eyes off the car ahead of them. Let me know if you and Penn start, I don't know, eating random farmers or something. I don't think she'd find people very tasty, Dave joked, giving a single dry laugh. Okay, so you don't want to talk to the potion monster. Why bother spying then? Moving the van as the light changed, keeping a few cars between the one they were currently tailing, JP gave a resigned huff. Lots of reasons. Do you want a list? I mean, you made me come along as backup, and Penn is really uncomfortable back there, so it seems like you owe me, Dave half asked, half questioned. Holding up one hand, JP started counting off. Because they could spread to more people, because they might try to retaliate against us if they learned that James didn't get converted properly, because the alchemists have a lot of networking contacts and they could be a threat through that, because we need to know what their actual plans are, and no, we can't just ask them, because they might lie, because their existence is a form of lying to begin with. He took a deep breath and then kept going, having lost track of how many points he had made, now just counting on his other hand and driving with his knees. Also, because technically we tried to ask them and it didn't work, and then on a more pragmatic me-style level, because learning how they make potions would be really valuable, because they probably have a vault somewhere with a bunch of cool stuff in it, and because they have personally offended me. Dave cleared his throat and stared at the van's steering wheel until JP slowly lowered his counting hands back and took firmer control of the vehicle. He let the conversation lapse for a bit as his friend drove them through a parking lot, keeping sight of the target vehicle as their quarry's car stopped at a red light, while not following directly behind them. It was a clever little move, but Dave didn't appreciate all the speed bumps, and he knew Pendragon didn't either, coiled up in the back of the van. The van was far smaller than Pendragon was at this point. His good girl would have been uncomfortable in a semi-trailer, but the simplest possible orange totem that research had managed to build all on their own was currently expanding the space available in the van's back, and while it was impressive, it also meant that speed bumps had a greater subjective motion for whoever was in that back. Like, in this case, the aircraft-sized aluminum-plated dragon, who was almost certainly not happy. So, Dave picked the conversation up as they re-entered the flow of traffic, a few cars back still. That's personal for you? Yeah? Dave, I swear to God, I need you to not psychoanalyze me right now, JP bluntly told him. Then he abruptly changed the subject. Hey, actually, it's been a while since we've really hung out. How you doing? Up to anything fun? Against anyone else JP knew, the flagrant attempt to deflect the conversation would have been detected and shot down. Against Dave, well, it wasn't that Dave didn't really get what JP was doing. He understood. It was more that he was perfectly fine just answering the question at face value and pivoting what they were talking about. It's been pretty good, Dave answered. I've been staying out with my grandpa, mostly. He's got this giant farm down in Grants Pass, him and my uncle. There's basically no one down there, so I spend a lot of time flying with Pen, making sure she's growing okay, that kind of thing. Also helping out with the animals. He's got a bunch of wildlife rescues, so I get to play with raccoons and foxes and stuff. It's nice. Closing his eyes firmly, JP tilted his head before replying, I didn't think I'd actually be jealous of you today, but here we are. Can I come play with the raccoons? Oh, sure. They can't be released. They've been there since they were tiny. No idea how to survive in the wild. Dave answered easily. I'm so happy right now, JP muttered angrily. Also, what's he grow? Huh? Your grandpa, on the farm. What does he grow on his farm? JP inquired, making casual conversation. Dave didn't answer right away, instead thumping his head back into the headrest of his seat and staring at the van's ceiling in silence, mouth hanging open. He uttered a confused noise. I have no idea. Comforting, JP lied. Wheat, probably? Dave didn't look down, tapping at his arms. Or is hay a crop? There's a lot of grass. Honestly, being gone half the time doesn't help me learn, probably. JP nodded. How's your uncle doing with the whole dragon thing? I think he thinks Pendragon's a student project, but aside from that, he likes her. Dave sighed. Anyway, hey, are we going to delve the route anytime soon? Now that we know this truck works. Van. Now that we know this van works, I'd love to get Penn some airtime in there. Also, well... Dave shrugged. There was something he was missing, in general, from the dungeons. Now, unlike some members of the Order, Dave didn't actually have a problem with the mundane world. He also didn't like how everyone else used real and dungeon as if they were different types of worlds. Any world was as real as another, and being out and about with people and geography that wasn't formed by a hostile alien mind was just as interesting to Dave as being in an endless office or a demonic sewer. At a certain point, if everything was equally strange around you, it really didn't matter if it involved an endless string of weird traps or not. And yet, Dave really liked dungeon delves, actually. About as equally as he liked hanging out with raccoons. It was just something cool, something to do. But also, the dungeons had stuff in them, and he wanted that stuff because it was magic. That part seemed self-explanatory. JP made a derisive noise, cutting off Dave's thought process. Nope, not going back in until we've cleared out the city. Oh. Dave deflated, looking back out the window to track the alchemist car they were tailing. How long will that take? You need more help? Dude, JP sighed. Sometimes he didn't know what to do with his friend. Do you want me to actually explain why that's a stupid thing to say? No, I'm good, Dave smirked, ignoring the verbal snipe. I mean, I trust you in general. He shrugged. Mostly I'm just sort of interested in the whole resource exploitation thing, you know? I've been sort of curious about it, because with the road, the only thing I can imagine being useful is, road? And road isn't a rare resource. Are we actually doing this now? JP groaned and looked around himself. We're in the middle of tailing someone who probably has some weird murder magic, and we're doing this. With a second, and then a third look at the car that was now slightly behind them and one lane over, Dave processed that thought. On the one hand, JP could be right. On the other hand, the most dangerous thing they had seen so far from this guy was that he didn't signal when changing lanes. So eventually he shrugged. I'll take the chance, Dave settled on. So, asphalt? Sand, I guess. Didn't I hear something about how the plants there were just normal plants from Earth that were invasive species? Is that what James called them? JP laughed. Yeah, mostly. Look, I'm not the person to ask about this. I'm here for the social stuff. But, yeah, sure. I guess it doesn't really help to steal entire strips of asphalt. I don't know. It's not like we've tried digging in the middle of the road desert or anything. We'll get there eventually, probably. There's got to be better ways to find mineral resources than randomly digging, Dave suggested in the voice he used for when he knew he was right. But I guess we could use it for making some of the big golem things. We've got the orb that... Hold that thought. JP's voice went hard and Dave shut up instantly. The car they were after had just turned. Off the main road, onto one of those connecting veins that strung through suburbia. They caught a good look at the driver as the car turned, another older gentleman with an angry frown and a salt and pepper beard. He hadn't said anything since getting in the car. The other two had. Audiobugs had picked them up quite clearly as they'd almost instantly dialed their fellow alchemists, and while they spoke in what was obviously coded language, the tension in their voices was enough to let everyone listening from the order know that it wasn't a polite check-in. One of the others had driven home, breaking the speed limit by a lot, and hadn't come out of their mansion since. The other had gone straight to the old manor house that the alchemists use as a place for their gatherings and a sort of storefront for anyone who could find them. This one, though? He had said absolutely nothing. He had just driven, using a few tricks that Nate had shown the Order's rogues to evade any potential tails. Dave was mostly here as muscle and to bother JP, but he was pretty sure they hadn't been spotted either. Their quarry was just paranoid. Rightly so, but still paranoid. And, in total silence, was heading to a seemingly random house in the middle of a middle-class suburb. JP parked the van at the end of the street, just around the corner. So he and Dave got a pretty clear view as, all at the same time, 3 different cars pulled up in the same driveway, their tailed alchemist pulling in alongside a pickup truck like they'd choreographed it. 3 people got out of 3 cars, not even acknowledging each other, wordlessly walking up the cobblestone path and into the unlocked front door. Okay, JP said, dialing Nate's number as he casually commented to himself and to Dave about the situation. I think we just found our parasites. Dave nodded, turning to peek into the back of the van through the tiny little window. They'd gotten a lucky break, but it was still worth checking to make sure Pendragon was ready to go, because one way or another, it might take a little bit of effort to crack this one.